love goes on, softly on. So don't be sighing or crying. Still live with our
So, welcome to another installment of the Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. Like all of the other ones I've been involved in so far, this one will be about Game of Thrones. Not quite sure why that is. It's just sort of the way this is rolling out. Eventually, we'll get to Mad Men, Breaking Bad, all sorts of other television as it comes on. Our guest today is Stephen Attewell. Did I pronounce that correctly?
No one in the family going back like 700 years can agree. It's either Attewell, Attewell. I've given up on trying to correct people, so...
And I don't want to call you
cool.
Stephen A, because that just has too many terrible implications.
Yeah.
So we'll just go with Stephen?
That's fine.
All right. And I think I have a couple scenes that I want to discuss, some of which I already posted, but a bit of... But I'm going to let you kind of run with the ball, and season 3, episode 1, go.
Okay, so, I mean, you know, I thought people's responses was quite interesting in that they were expecting a huge bang, but if you look back to especially season 2, episode 1, these have to be set-up episodes. There are so many storylines, so many plots, where you have to tee up what's going on to all the stories we were already following, and then, you know, introduce all of the, like, umpteen billion new characters. But I thought it did a good job of kind of melding all of this together. And I kind of had, in terms of kind of organizing some thoughts, sort of 4 interestingly paralleled scenes that I thought we could talk about. Shall we start with Jon Snow in the Wildling camp?
That sounds great.
Okay, so, I mean, I see this as interestingly paired with Dany's arrival in Astapor, in that these two characters are always at different extremes, right? One's ice, one's fire, one's all the way up in the north, one's all the way over in the east. And here we have them both entering through significant doorways. Did you notice the framing of, you know, Mance Rayder's tent frame, and then that big imposing doorway that Dany goes through?
I did, and I also kind of noticed that Mance Rayder's tent frame looks an awful lot like the one in season 1 that when
Mir Mazdur
Chris attacks Dany in the tent. It's a very similar setup, but
yeah.
No, keep going.
So, I mean, the interesting thing is, you know, in both cases, they're going to see a man who controls an army. And in both cases, the place that they're going to and what they experience there tells you a lot about the culture that they're dealing with. That, you know, Mance's camp, Jon's walking through it, it's very disorganized. There's people all over the place. Tents are kind of popped up wherever they want to be. They're being constructed on the go. And it's kind of organic, right? There's lots of bones and hides and human life. And it's very, I mean, it speaks to the kind of the wildling culture, that it's all about complete freedom, that everyone's doing their own thing. But it's kind of the sharp-edged freedom that Rand Paul would hate like 5 minutes after he got there, because there are no property rights. There's no law except strength. You know, there's that exchange between Jon Snow and Ygritte, where he says, well, am I free to go? She says, sure, I'm free to kill you. And then we see the absolute opposite of that in Astapor, where you had this inhuman order and rigidity, where people have been literally dehumanized in service to a slave society. And I thought that parallel was quite interesting.
No, it really was. There were a couple of interesting things. One, just visually looking at the lines of the Unsullied, and how they were supposed to represent this perfect order. You know, here we'll come, we'll cut off your nipple, you'll be fine, and just stand there and take it. But what was interesting is that if you actually look at those scenes, a lot of them are wobbling. I know
some of the extras couldn't quite hit the mark.
But I think it works better that way. That they are aiming for perfection and failing to actually achieve it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Versus the Wildling camp, which isn't really aiming at anything and is doing a damn fine job of it. And the one, I guess structurally, I hadn't thought about the fact that these are, in both cases we have Danny and John supplicating in front of a man with an army. I guess the difference would be structurally in terms of their relative power. John has none, and Danny, and I'm not sure in the show, was she supposed to not know High and Low Valyrian? I mean, was she?
I saw both her and Jorah Mormont reacting. Okay. And very subtly choosing not to react, that they both speak the language, and that there's this interesting translation game going, where, there's what they're supposed to be understanding, there's what's actually being said, and there's what they're perceiving.
And I guess they just didn't play for laughs the way they did in the book.
A little bit. A lot of people laughed at the... I watched it with a group of friends, at the line about, this is an old man who stinks of piss. And should I translate that? Of course not. The difference between Danny and John is kind of cultural power. Danny speaks the lingo. She knows in many different ways. She knows what slavery is. She knows what Valyrian is. John doesn't understand the culture of the wildlings yet. That's why he kind of makes a fool of himself by kneeling in a place which is defined by their refusal to kneel to anyone. But he's eventually going to learn.
Yeah. Also, he knelt in the middle of a circle. Me and my stupid circle infatuation. There are more of them, but I think. I mean, obviously, the other big difference that bears mentioning is, of course, dragons. John doesn't have any. He doesn't even have a direwolf at this point.
Yeah, Ghost is off helping the Night's Watch, which is a change I didn't quite get.
I mean, I guess it was necessary, but also sort of creates the bond between Sam and John. It makes that a little bit stronger if Ghost is out in lieu of protecting John, is protecting Sam. That makes that relationship all the more like, if even my dog is come right. But yeah, the scene of him supplicating before Mance Rayder, that was first the not Mance Rayder, and then I thought it was sort of strange that, I guess, how quickly he did it. In other words, and not even comparing it to how quickly he did it in the novel, just in terms of the amount of screen time and how much we've seen John becoming more and more independent, to see him just following orders. I mean, because he was told, go in, be a spy, and he's like, all right, I'm going to be a spy. What do I need to do? All right, take me to your leader, and I'll bow before him. And it's almost like, why would you trust this guy? I mean,
I thought they kind of nicely pulled that back, though, in the speech with Mance Rayder, where once he's in front of the actual guy, and who is saying directly to him, give me a reason that I'm going to buy as to whether you should come here or not, he gets in his face a little bit. He says, well, if I'm a traitor, you're a traitor. He was your brother, he was my brother, and I killed him. And ultimately, when Mance sees right through his initial story about liberty, he says, I want to be on the side that fights for the living, which is a change from the book.
Yeah.
But it's one that I thought worked, in that it kind of it's a more like consistent through line from season 2, that John sees something that he's not supposed to. And this changes his understanding of what's beyond the North and the Night's Watch itself in ways that are going to carry forwards.
And the other thing is, I think in a way that the books didn't do, the idea of not just the White Walkers, but their hordes of reanimated dead. It's actually a lot more frightening in the series than it ever was in the book. In the book, it not enough people take the threat seriously. Oh, it's been 10,000 years, That's like twice biblical history. I mean, who gives a fuck? But in the series, it makes it quite clear, and I think using Sam as a proxy for the audience is a really good idea. Having him be the one to end season 2 by staring down a White Walker, and then to open with him running through the mountains.
Yeah, which I thought was had a nice horror movie aesthetic to it, in the way that they were sort of showing and not showing, and then the beast that grabs him and keeps going after his leg, even while it had it like
Set on fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Dogs on top of it. I mean,
just for the people who are like book readers who were really pissed off that a certain thing didn't happen, it doesn't happen then in the books either. There are great things for Sam to come.
I think I'll just say something that will no doubt be very controversial, and it'll probably be the only thing that people talk about, which is, fuck book readers. I don't care if you've just read the books or just watched the series. Each is in its own medium. It has to work as it is. Some things that work in novels don't work in film. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen either of the versions of Ulysses that have been filmed, but they're both terrible.
No, I haven't.
They're awful. And
they don't sound like very filmable sources.
No, and that's sort of an extreme example, but it's the same logic, which is things that work on film don't work in literature and vice versa. And so people who really want it, I always sort of wonder what motivates that. Why are you so invested in the way it was that you can't actually appreciate the way that it's being represented here? At least be able to acknowledge that the different media, different expectations, and because otherwise, granted, many internet comments are born of tiny differences between series and their works, or the works they're based on. But honestly, I'm very happy that Joss Whedon didn't remain true to the spirit of the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. Thank God he saw the mistakes that were made and updated. But this is not going to go over well.
I think there's differences of two scales. One is, and I think you look at the way that people responded to Tywin and Arya's storyline last season, which was complete fabrication, but adored, versus how they felt about, say, the changes to like Robb and Catelyn's storyline, where what's been changed materially affects their characters and their motivations and implications for their actions. So I think the key thing for me is don't be kind of relentlessly on one side or the other, but kind of see where adaptation serves a useful purpose and where
find a happy medium. And
exactly.
And you have to, another way of looking at it is that you have to respect each audience that you have. George R.R. Martin has to respect the audience of the people who've written the books, but when he's writing episodes, he has to respect the audience who have only seen the HBO version. And he could remain, forever faithful, but from his point of view, that's got to be sort of boring. If I created these characters over a decade ago and they were going around doing the same damn things that they've been doing for 10, I might want to actually say, 10 years ago I had this idea and I think I have a better one now. Fans can disagree, but
Brian Kirkman's doing a similar thing on Walking Dead where he was like, you know what, when we did that, it didn't really work. It had these negative consequences down the road.
Rick, shut the fuck up.
Better.
Shut up, Rick, shut up.
Is this a point where I can talk about my theory about Talissa Megere or not? Or would that be a spoiler?
No, that's fine.
Sure. So there's a theory going around based on a YouTube clip that you can see.
Yeah.
I posted it into the comments last week that Talissa is a spy for the Lannisters. And that explains why the character isn't the character from the book. And this is very equally divided, the viewership about whether this is a good idea or not. But I'm really hoping it pans out because it at least says there was a deviation from the source material that was done with a purpose in mind. It wasn't done just because they thought Asha and Osha sounded too similar. It was done because they said, we've got characters and things that have to happen. We've got a different medium to work with. Let's kind of get to the same end with a different path, and I quite like that. Speaking of working, what did you think about the giant on the one hand and then the deadly manticore on the other in terms of a use of CGI in the world?
I thought the giant worked. He was a little too formally attired, but
yeah, I kind of missed the Yeti.
Yeah, I just I mean, this is going to be something that a lot of viewers are going to have to deal with. I mean, with Melisandre as well, as the series goes on, we're going to have a lot more pure fantasy elements. Whereas we've had kind of an almost Shakespearean battle of wits for the throne up to this point, or battle with battles. We're going to start to see a lot more of these fantastic elements, and I like that they're breaking them in slowly. Like the giant is no big deal. He comes into the screen,
and he looks like he fits there.
Exactly. Rob looks at him, and he's like, "Oh, you are very big."
And I like the detail of the pounding the stick into the ground. It made it have a really physical presence.
Yeah, especially if you had your subwoofer on. It was great. I thought that worked. In part because I thought I'll be kind and say I really thought that worked.
Yeah.
And what about the other part of your question?
What about the Manticore? I mean,
yeah, that's part of I was going to answer.
it didn't look as real, and I thought there was something weird about the physical movement of Barristan going in and stabbing it that didn't quite click.
I think the problem with a lot of CGI is simply that it can all be solved if there's weather. So for example, if you film something in CGI and you add snow after the fact, it creates a nice little fuzzy, blurry thing, but everything is fuzzy and blurry, not just the CGI. I mean, this is what was so terrible about watching The Hobbit in 48 frames per second, is that it was very, very obvious.
Everything looked like sets.
Yeah, everything looked like sets, and two, Frodo was talking to this thing that looked more real than he did, and which of course means it looked totally fake. It didn't look real at all. It was so sharp.
Yeah, the Manticore had that sharpness.
Yeah, I just don't like that, and I don't even remember the Manticore actually, but I've only watched the episode twice now, so.
It was that little bug thing that comes out of the bowl.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, that looked terrible.
Yeah, but I would say the little girl with the freaky blue teeth, that was scary.
I was fine with that. That was, a nice sort of connection to the House of the Undying, although I thought she was not supposed to be part of that. I thought she was supposed to be that other group of assassins. But...
Yeah, the sorrowful men who say, "I'm so sorry" when they kill you.
Yeah.
I think they cut that out just because,
too many clans of assassons at this point.
Yeah, it's one secret society too many. It's sort of conservation of ninjutsu.
Or we could just call it anti-aliasing to kind of stick with the sharpness at it. It's anti-aliasing when you decide that there is such a thing as one conspiracy too far, and just kind of rein it in. I shouldn't coin things this late in the day, but yeah, I thought that was okay. The Giant actually liked, but also the way that the Giant was shot, and I don't want to pull it up on my computer right now, but if I'm remembering correctly, it was a nice low angle shot. So it was a kind of nice pan to the right from a low angle, emphasize the size without making it look unrealistic, and then we cut to a shot of John looking at what we had just seen. Which is a nice, it encompasses our reaction to the same thing, and we're having the same feeling that he's having, which is, do we actually want to believe what we're seeing? And if you can create that sort of mimicry of what the character's feeling with what you're doing, it feels more organic, even though obviously it's more contrived. But anyway, keep going. You have other questions. I keep seeing my own reflection in my glasses.
Sure.
I'm freaking myself out. So.
I can take my own off as well. So the kind of other.
We're all now blind. Okay.
Yeah, we're all completely blind. So the other thing that I thought I wanted to discuss from the Astapor section is this debate between Dany and Jorah about how are they going to deal with slavery, and I thought it was very interesting that Jorah is basically acting like a Virginia planter in like the 1780s about how much better it is to be a kind slave master, given that he is, at the end of the day, someone who is exiled for slaving, whereas Dany, someone who was in one reading, a slave herself. You
She
know,
was sold. I mean,
yeah, well, sold into sexual
yeah,
slavery to someone she couldn't possibly consent to.
My only problem with that whole scene is that Dany she already is a slave owner. She already owns slaves.
Well,
I mean,
she set them free at the end of the first season.
yeah, but
There's still that like white hair, white savior issue.
yeah.
But I did think it was interesting
It's not like
this
it's a
kind
new
of
situation for her.
yeah.
Like, oh my God, what am I gonna do with slaves?
But I think it's slightly different in that now she's given the choice about whether she's going to engage in mass scale with a slave society. That previously her plan was the Dothraki, right? This group of free warriors from a different culture who would decide to follow her, and she still has some of them, versus like this force of 8,000 men that are going to be viewed, and there was a very subtle allusion to this, about how these men will be viewed in Westeros. We can see from Varys, Westerosi do not like trust or esteem eunuchs, and they're not that keen on people from Essos either. So
well, on the one hand, I mean, you can't trust, from the perspective of someone like Cersei, you can't trust someone you can't manipulate, and if you're using sexual wiles as your main source of power, eunuchs obviously are going to get in your way. Same thing with the camp prostitutes that are discussed more in the books than in the series. But what's used to mollify the troops? I mean, none of that, the traditional logic works. And I don't know. I just don't buy Dany's. She's had slaves before. She just locked her former sex slave in a vault and left.
Yeah, I did. That was one of those changes I kind of didn't like.
I mean, she's obviously thought about the issues.
Sure. But it's gonna be interesting to see how she comes down on this decision. In the same way that Jon's faced with a decision about which side he's on.
It's just, I mean, that's the thing. As much as we like her, she's not. Jon at least has noble motivations. He's trying to protect people. He wants the wall to hold. He wants the North to survive. Dany wants the kingdom that is her birthright back. We should not like that. We're Americans. We should not be very happy when people are like, no, it's in my blood. I'm supposed to rule here.
Except that Americans are goofy about princesses. That's like my long-standing beef with the Disney princess thing.
Clintons,
oh yeah, sure.
I mean, we're goofy about that anyway, but we shouldn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, we should be for the wildling way of doing things. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting in the books that doesn't quite make it into the show is that democracy is presented as this weird barbarian custom, much in the same way that Persians would have looked at
Athenian democracy.
We have
a direct democracy in the Iron. Should we talk about it? We probably shouldn't talk about it.
Well, there's a couple things. So the mountain men that Tyrion meets, like when he's among them, he says at one point, like he's thinking to himself, they allow everyone to sit in their councils of war, and even women get to speak. God, these people are backwards. And the Mance Raider, he's this kind of fearsome example of like what happens when you let just anyone be king. They, create this giant army. But let's talk about the Iron Islands, because there's an interesting kind of quasi-tradition, which is that they have this tradition of the Kingsmoot, right? But they haven't followed it for hundreds of years.
All right, everybody, spoiler alert. We're jumping way ahead. We're jumping like half book ahead now, aren't we?
Yeah, a little bit.
All right, people, you've been warned. Go on.
So, traditionally the way it works is that any captain can, stand in the Kingsmoot and say, I want to be king. And if enough people shout for them, they get to be king. But Balon never went through that. None of the Ironborn lords have gone through that for hundreds of years, and it's always been this contested thing that, they've got one tradition that says anyone can do this, and they've got another tradition that says if I have more men with axes, I'm the king. But there's another democracy that people often forget about. That's the Night's Watch. The Lord Commander is elected by all the men of the Night's Watch. And even though, this was actually the first essay I ever wrote on Race for the Iron Throne, was about the prologue, and what it tells us about the way that the Night's Watch has become corrupted by essentially class society. That there are noblemen and there are peasants. And that, there's a reason that Jon Snow is being groomed for rank and not someone like Gren or Pip. But they still have this ideal of election and, a sense of brotherhood and equality.
Well, election and preterition. Which obviously go hand in hand, but, we actually do have Jon trying to lift up some of the preterite, Sam and such. But yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that because it was a few books ahead. But the elections in the Night's Watch versus, what we get with Garrett and what's that asshole's name?
Sir Waymar Royce.
Yes, Royce with his fancy clothes and his.
Yes, who happens to come from the Vale, which is the most class stratified part of the Seven Kingdoms, arguably.
Yeah, and he makes fun of people. Oh yeah. You suckled at your mother's breast. Yeah. Your mom? I had a wet nurse. Really? That's your... Yeah, my students hate him. And will again.
He's an interesting character, though, because as contemptible he's occupying the space of, the asshole West Point cadet lieutenant who always gets shot in Vietnam movies, 5 minutes into the film. But at the same time, in the books anyway, he's the one guy of the three of them who, when the Night's Watch is faced with the enemy that it was designed to fight, stands his ground and, goes down fighting. The other two, one hides and one runs away.
Well,
so there's that, interesting...
That is their job, to run away. Because, a scout's no good if they're dead. The only thing is... Then they're just like Benjen, and you're like, all right, well...
Well, yeah,
we haven't seen you in a while.
Who knows what the hell's going on there? So, speaking of wet nurses and noble families, I want to sort of talk about these two scenes of Lannisters and their family issues. Tyrion and Cersei, and then Tyrion and Tywin. It's just very interesting. I picked up on the whole, starting the scene, looking through the gates. That was very interesting. And, speaking of your circles, did you notice how Cersei and Tyrion are constantly circling each other in that scene and maintaining this distance between them?
I did, because at this point I am physically incapable of not noticing circles in Game of Thrones. It's just, it has become a hermeneutic for me, such that I can't get away from it. But I thought those scenes both of them were really well done, especially the Tywin and Tyrion. In part because Tyrion is the only sympathetic Lannister, and
yes,
right. Well, yeah, and this was the all right, everyone pile on Tyrion episode.
Yeah,
he's down. Should we help? No, let's kick the little fucker, right? It was.
Yeah.
It's
although it's interesting, even at his worst, he knows how to deal with Cersei. He's able to put her on the back foot. Even though, he starts off that scene basically believing he's about to be murdered. That, here's his sister who's just ordered his death with two of the Kingsguard who she sent last time, and, he could die right now. And it takes him about 5 seconds to realize, oh, she's afraid of me. I have something over her. And it's interesting, there's a third figure in the room, which is the image of father. Right? It's their daddy issues, invisibly manifest. And how much of that ties into this question of truth and slander. Because I saw that very much carrying into the scene with Tyrion and Tywin. In that, again, it's two people maintaining a constant distance, although it's more fixed. as it should be, because Tywin's the one with all the power, and Tyrion doesn't have anything he really wants. But there's also a third figure in the room, which is Tyrion's mother, Tywin's dead wife.
Who, he's careful to remind him, you killed. Like, you, little boy.
Yeah, and, and the kind of, the you can sort of, someone, I on a podcast I listened to, I don't remember which one, sort of described Tywin as Lannister kryptonite. That this family of incredibly snarky, scheming, cynical people who keep a distance between themselves and the world, the moment they get near Tywin, all of those defenses fade away. Like, you saw that when he's with Jaime in Season 1, where, like, Jaime is this strutting alpha male figure, and then within a second, he's, like, reduced to a stuttering child.
Well, it's because his dad had his hands in a stag. I mean, it's sort of hard to maintain the aura of manliness when the other guy in the room is literally disemboweling something. You will feel less manly.
Yeah.
It
is interesting though, because he's the best swordsman in the country. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, I don't think Tyrion actually loses the battle of wits with his father, and I think that's what's interesting. And I sort of wrote about how I increasingly think that the way that they're going in terms of how they're setting up the show visually is that it's all Tywin. And Cersei thinks she's manipulating things, but she's doing it at Tywin's behest. Tyrion thinks he's doing things at his behest. Jaime, we don't even know where the fuck he is, but he's still somehow acting on Tywin's behalf. And I see them all in a way that makes them actually more sympathetic, especially Cersei, as pawns in their father's game. Up until the obvious point, which we won't mention anything about, because that would be too spoilers.
I see it slightly differently, and to build off your post on service, Tywin has this very interesting conception of the family as a unit above the individual. That you are in service to the House Lannister, which even Tywin himself is in service to. It's all about legacy. It's all about what will happen 100 years after they're dead. And that, so much of what's going on is about the image of House Lannister, that Cersei can't allow her image to be tainted, because otherwise she's in danger of becoming the disappointing child. And then what's going on, in part, between Tywin and Tyrion is a battle over different images and different truths. That Tyrion says, I defended the city. I bled for my family, and by law, I am the heir to Casterly Rock. And the subtext is, I am your son. Treat me like your son. Yeah. Please treat me like your son. And then Tywin responds with a completely different truth. You brought a whore into my bed. I saved the city. And you are the closest thing to no son of mine that the law will allow. And I thought that was very interesting, how this family is so much about the manipulation of different truths.
And you are right, and I hadn't thought about it like that, but you are right that the one point on which Tyrion loses is that argument, which I saved us at the Battle of Blackwater, therefore I should, be in charge of Casterly Rock. That actually makes no sense. One thing has nothing to do with the other.
Sure.
And Tyrion in his mind creates a causal connection that doesn't actually exist. And Tywin is quick.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to their past, which is, Jaime was supposed to be the heir. He was supposed to be the new Tywin, right? But he never stepped into his father's shoes because he joins the Kingsguard, right? Tyrion didn't know what to expect when he grew of age, and what does he get? He doesn't get Casterly Rock. He doesn't get.
He gets the sewers of Casterly Rock.
He gets the sewers. He gets literally to handle the shit, and he does it brilliantly. And here's another. It's been recapitulated. Yeah, he's nice, but and it's recapitulated later, right? Before Jaime's captured, Tywin is leaning on him to lead the war effort. Jaime is taken out of the picture, so Tywin leaves Tyrion to deal with the shit in King's Landing. And the moment he's done, he loses any semblance of, of respect that he used to have. And I did think it was supremely ironic for a man who we just saw the previous episode, right, literally riding into the king's throne room on a gleaming white stallion to get this giant medal pinned on him. Yeah, shitting on the floor. But he says, "Oh, I don't demand anything when I win." When he's just, gotten this massive, heaping of power once again. The thing that has defined his entire adult life is that he's been the hand of the king for the longest in recorded history, except for one guy. That's who he is. He's Tywin the Hand.
But the thing is now he's only the hand in name. He is the king, and I think it's something that we get almost feel a little bad for Joffrey, and that which is an amazing bit of sympathy building. We almost feel bad for Joffrey that when he realizes that first his grandfather and then his newly betrothed are both exercising a kind of power that he simply can't.
Yeah,
right?
That he's a coward.
Well, I think he realized that, but I mean I have weird issues, and I haven't really looked back at it the way I should, but I have strange issues about the timing of Joffrey running and whether or not he saw the Hound in the Blackwater episode. I think he ran before the Hound did.
No, because the Hound, Tyrion tells him, you've got to go back out there, and he says, straight to Joffrey, he says, "Fuck the king, fuck the king's guard, fuck the city." And then, he's looking straight at Joffrey. He says, "Fuck the king, I'm out of here." And that's when Joffrey gets the summons. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. If Joffrey sees that it's okay to run, that it might, if the Hound is doing it, maybe I can do that too. But that's probably another issue. I guess I would say that
I meant more physical cowardice, that he shrinks back from contact with the world, and when you see him doing vile things to people, it's always through intermediaries, right? He uses the Kingsguard to beat Sansa. He puts a crossbow onto a whore to make her beat another whore, to death, or we don't know. And this is really making me very, very interested for when we finally meet Ramsay Bolton. And I'm so curious as to how the audience is going to react to this very different figure. But what I meant by cowardice compared to Marjorie is that he's hiding in this box from his own people, and she effortlessly kind of makes herself this Lady Di figure, and just charms the pants off everyone.
Yeah. Instant sympathy amongst the children. She's very good at it. Very sort of touching if you didn't realize it was all an act. I mean, you'd think, well, she might be able to reform Joffrey, although I think it's been made pretty plain he's beyond that. But no, I do like that image that I brought up in that the second to last image. No, the last image in the post of Joffrey actually cowering, and the directors actually love this pose for cowering.
Yeah.
And I read about it earlier in one of my posts about circles in Game of Thrones, when Cat and Tyrion are surrounded, and right, his hands are tied, and he's tucked like this.
Yeah.
He's tucked like this, and she has a knife. And then you had just this past episode, you have Joffrey in the back of his little processional carriage,
his palanquin.
Yeah.
He's literally being carried around like baggage.
And I gotta say, I love some of those stills I took where he seems to be spying on his own people,
yes,
while everyone is looking at him.
almost like they're like a foreign species to him.
Yeah.
That he's like looking at them through the bars in a zoo, and you don't know which is on which side of the bars.
Well, no, exactly. He thinks that he's the one at the zoo, and everyone else is looking at him as if he's the animal. And
yeah. And speaking of the posture, did you notice he does the same posture at dinner? Like when his mother is, or not the same posture, but a very similar posture. That when his mother is saying, "Oh yes, when we went to Flea Bottom, the king almost died," he sort of shrinks down in his chair. And I love that scene at dinner where, you can sort of see that Marjorie is playing with Cersei, almost in a doubles match with Loras, but Cersei doesn't have a partner because Joffrey is like, the only thing he's thinking about is, how can I look like a real man? Right? I've just been like verbally emasculated by my mother.
Which, honestly, you'd think he would be used to at this point, but apparently not. So, was there anything else you wanted to cover? I'm looking at the time gone by, and actually I don't see it. So,
we started at 6:20, I believe.
Okay, so we're at 40 minutes. Which
talk about coming up for next week.
I don't know what's coming up for next week. I have hopes, but the same hopes for the entire season.
Yeah, I mean the things that we're explicitly going to see for next week.
Yeah, my DVR always cuts off like.
I did get to see those. So Arya meets the Brotherhood without banners.
Oh, Arya, yes, I would like to see her.
Yes.
In next week's episode.
We get what else? Arya meets the band without brothers. Hold on. Let me look this up. Just because I knew this a minute ago.
It's okay. What I'll do is I'll just say that I'm going to edit this all out, but then when I try to, it's going to be such a pain in the ass. I'm going to leave it all in. But
gotcha.
We can at least pretend, keep up the charade that this will all be edited out. We can't hear you typing.
All right. I'm just pulling up Winter is Coming, which, by the way, if people are following the show, winteriscoming.net is a really good resource for anything about the show. But, I that's my favorite storyline out of this book.
Oh, Arya? Absolutely. You said you were surprised when I thought you said you were surprised that, like, my students, for them, it's all Arya and Jon Snow. It
was more the Jon Snow, because
absolutely.
I've always preferred Tyrion to Jon Snow, in part because Jon has always struck me as more the conventional fantasy protagonist, and Tyrion's so unusual.
Yeah, I think it's also that we're both writers, and I think we appreciate the written word a little more than the average. I think most people. Well, to put it this way, while you look that up, I start when I teach Game of Thrones. I start by teaching Fellowship of the Ring, and so they get to know Sean Bean as Boromir
and his many deaths.
The majority of the class doesn't make the connection. They don't realize that Ned Stark is played by the same guy as Boromir. They fall in love with Boromir, right? His betrayal and his redemption, and they absolutely
so they really
love it.
Identify with the
guy. They love him, and then they completely forget he fucking exists. And when we get to Game of Thrones, halfway through the quarter, someone's like, Ned Stark looks familiar, and I just was like, yeah, Boromir. And half the class, their eyes just, and these light bulbs are going off everywhere. And you sort of wonder, how did he not notice that? And in part, it's because he was playing the traditional heroic figure in Lord of the Rings, the redemptive character.
Yeah.
Whereas in Game of Thrones, he's a much more complex, slightly older. He doesn't look really that much older. I hope to look that good when I am that much older than I was in 2001. But I think Snow fits in the same kind of pattern as Boromir. They like the down and out character who comes back and makes something of himself, and Tyrion, I think they think he's funny, but in all honesty, I've had lots of conversations in class where I've had to kind of steer them one way or another and say, actually you're laughing the wrong way. And I think I mentioned this at one point, either on Facebook or on the blog, that one of my students came up with an idea for something called reverse Game of Thrones, where Tyrion would be played by a normal person, and everyone else would be a little person. And we had to have a conversation about there is a right way to laugh with an Tyrion, because he does play the jester when it suits him, and he is actually quite funny. And
there's going to be some really uncomfortable moments later in season 3 and then in season 4, where I'm very curious about how they're going to handle the specific issue of Tyrion as the butt of laughter and as the...
We're never going to get that far. We barely get through season 1 as is, except for the few enterprising students. The quarter system. I got 10 weeks.
So they were mostly focusing on Jon Snow in season 1, because I was going to say, one of the things I thought worked the least well in season 2 was Jon Snow's storyline.
Yeah, they don't see that for the most part.
He just screwed up from day 1. So okay, here's what's on for next week. It's Arya with a Brotherhood Without Banners.
All right.
It's Jaime and Cersei have their face-off. And it's Sansa meeting the Queen of Thorns.
Yeah, the less Sansa, the better. I've read online where people say her character is being redeemed by the series. No, I don't see it. I don't know. Maybe you disagree.
I do, in the sense that, it wasn't until I started doing Race for the Iron Throne that I really got inside Arya's head. And when you go back to her chapters, for 4 or 5 times, and you realize Sansa is someone raised on fantasy literature. And she expects the world to work like fantasy literature. And that
she's raised,
in many ways...
In the fiction of the show, it's not fantasy literature. She is an ideological creature. I mean, pure and simple. She has bought everything in the old Marxist sense of ideology, any which one you want to choose. But
sure, and now she's doing something else, in that she's trying to figure a way through the world as if she's learning it for the first time. And that's why I did like the scene with her and Littlefinger, where she's desperately trying to get out of an untenable situation, but she's starting to get a little bit better at it. Where you saw her thing about, when Littlefinger says, well, how can I trust you? Well, and she parrots straight back at him, well, that's because I'm the worst liar in this town. Throwing his own words back in his face, which is a signature King's Landing move. And I have to say, I'm looking forward to that as much for the Queen of Thorns as I am for Sansa, because the Queen of Thorns is a fascinating character for the series, and I hope that lots of people write about her. Because she's a very different...
All right, okay, I see.
Well, I mean, not just you, but, there's been so much debate about Game of Thrones and gender. That, Olenna is a character that we really haven't seen on the show before.
But she's going to essentially be, I mean, and in the novel, she's sort of almost treated like almost the female equivalent of Tyrion. Someone whose social status has placed them in a position where they can say anything they want to and be taken seriously or not, but they still have the freedom to, speak their mind.
Yeah, well, that's certainly how she appears. How she is and that's what I like about her, is she's very multifaceted. She looks like this frail old grandmother that no one really listens to anymore. But what she does behind the scenes is very different. And it's kind of like, I think one way of thinking about her is she's like a combination of Cersei and Tyrion. That she is playing the female in a world of politics, but she's doing it from a place of kind of satire and sympathetic humor.
Oh man, you just made the image of Cersei and Tyrion. Stupid fucking show makes that a little too literal. Anyway, go on.
Whereas I think Lena Headey has done some really interesting things with Cersei's character, but and her drunk scene in episode 9 is a good example.
Oh, absolutely. No, that was
because normally she's not allowed to be funny.
Yeah,
she's got to be evil. whereas Elena is funny.
I mean, on the one hand, Lena Headey, still in my mind, is Sarah Connor, and it's not going to ever, I think, go away. And so, in part, there are weird moments where I feel that her vindictive plotting is completely justified because only Joffrey can stop Skynet from. But I do think I read about this, a class where I desperately tried to make Cersei a sympathetic character. And I argued with my class for about an hour and a half. And then I had another class right after it. And I, again, unsuccessfully argued for an hour and a half. And then, because of Masochist, I did the same thing in the next class.
Right. Trying
to get them to understand the position Cersei's in. She has no power. She, like Dany, was sort of sold into slavery, essentially. You know, her new husband whispers another woman's name on their wedding night, and it's sort of all downhill from there. She does what she can. You know, she's had a terrible life, and also, you know, it's weird the way that incest is always made light of on the show, but I don't necessarily, they never really specify who the original instigator of the Jaime Cersei affair was.
Yeah. I mean, if I recall correctly, I don't know if this is spoiling, but it was pretty mutual in that it's always been shown as this kind of almost like a fascination with a mirror, that they were they're so identical. Yeah, they're so identical, and I think they started at a time really before they started being differentiated by gender. That there was a time when Cersei could dress up like Jaime and see what it was like to run around the world as a boy.
They went to the Lacanian mirror stage together.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to go there, but I can see that. I just, that's a nice thing to write, but in terms of like character building, I've never actually known a relationship that was that co-equal. And I think it's a power differential that matters, especially in light of things that happen later with Jaime coming back around and wants who to. But we'll table that discussion. We have 10 episodes to spoil the entire rest of the series, so we don't have to do it all this first time. We should probably try to wrap it up. I didn't talk much about the visuals, in part because I think you were right. I think I did ruin it by writing about it before, but I would just feel totally unprepared. Okay. I'm just one of those people. You should see my lesson plans. I never use. Well, no, you do, because I put them on the internet.
Yeah. Well, I've walked into sections without lesson plans, so.
Yeah, I've done that. It's always ended horribly. I end up just claiming to the class that I have a sinus infection, took too much Sudafed, and that's why I can't string two thoughts together. So I totally over-prepare. But also, it's just, honestly, for me, writing that today was a really, really difficult. It felt a lot like my qualifying exams. It just felt too soon. Like I haven't absorbed all the information yet, and I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm glad, though, it made enough sense to you that you brought it up, because it really seems like the Lannisters are being imprisoned visually.
Yeah.
I don't know if my explanation makes any sense, but I definitely have evidence that that's going on, at least.
Yeah, sure. No, I saw the bars at work. I mean, I'm not so sure about the bit with Dany, because there is that one shot of the downward hanging canopy, but then it pans to this amazing vista of Astapor.
Oh no, that just helps. That helps make my argument. Because
so that she's coming out of the cage? Is that the idea?
Yeah, no, that's exactly.
I like that.
Is that by juxtaposing these two shots, which I could have gotten really technical and actually, scribbled my yellow lines all over them, but the vanishing point is not vanishing point, but the
focal point
meets at the same exact spot on the screen. These two shots are meant to sort of echo each other, and it's all about the fact that Dany, everything wide open, there's a fucking dragon in front of her, and if he wants to leave, he can just fly away.
We didn't even talk about the dragons!
Well, okay, we should just...
In terms of, CGI in the world.
Yeah, I thought the dragons were fine, but I'm used to seeing.
They were amazing in.
Oh, okay.
I mean, what I loved about it was you had the tactile thing of where she's scratching that dragon like a cat.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And also the way they were interacting with the water as not just skimming over it, but diving into it and pulling fish out of it and frying the fish.
I have this odd feeling that they were like throwing seals off a boat and just kind of doing motion capture. But and also I scratch my cat's chins and their breath seems to resemble fire at times. But I thought the dragons were excellent. I mean, granted, there's not that much competition for making a realistic dragon because. Yeah,
but bad dragons look really, really bad. Do you remember the movie Dragon Knight?
No, I never saw it. See, I was going back to
Sean
Reign of
Connery
Fire.
As the dragon?
No, I never saw that one.
See if you can find it somewhere, because it's one of those examples of the way that fantasy used to work before Lord of the Rings, so that you could do it big and succeed.
I'm not the biggest fan of the dude, this is terrible, taste it kind of argument. But yeah, no, I thought the dragons were great. To make them charming and personable, which they should be, given that they're going to grow into 8-ton fire-breathing beasts who are the equivalent of that world's nuclear bomb. They should be cuddly. I thought that was done really well, but I also like the kind of nice bond between the sort of, and as you said, like scratching a cat on its chin, there was something casual and familiar about that, not practiced. And so I thought that CGI worked really well. Unlike the stupid little thing came out of the ball. What the fuck was that? Yeah. But
and we'll see how. Because there was a connection there that I haven't always seen with the wolves. In part, this has to do with the fact that they're using real wolves and just cinematically making them look enormous. But the casualness of connection that should be there between a Stark and his wolf just isn't there.
Well, no, it isn't. But without getting into spoilers, I think that's in part because the Starks themselves don't yet realize the connection that they have with their direwolves.
Yeah.
They don't understand the full extent of it yet. I think
we've only seen them actually physically touching Wolf once, when Robb entered Jaime's cell in the premiere of season 2.
That is very specific. No, because wait. Technically, I think Bran, but he's unconscious, so that doesn't count.
Well, it's standing over him, but he's not interacting with it in the way that you think a child would with the wolf that saved his life.
Yeah. In his defense, he was in a coma.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna.
Okay. Cool.
I think we do need to wrap this up because otherwise the file gets so big it crashes my computer. Which is something that will be rectified hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But about 45, 50 minutes is as much as we can go. But this has been a hell of a lot of fun.
It's been fun. Can't wait for next week.
All right, and we'll do this again next week. So join us again for the Lawyers, Guns, and Money Game of Thrones podcast. How the fuck did we end up doing? All right, it's what we do. All right, we'll see you next week.